What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that gives leadership its close-up. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of the Brexit party. That is, if there still is a Brexit party to be led. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from the ups and downs of the pound to the latest industrial action on the London Underground, and of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we are joined by Lynda Symons, founder of Kidz Kabin, providing early years learning inspired by the children themselves. Their inclusive, diverse nursery fosters learning through three central pillars: curiosity, active engagement, and scaffolded experiences. Lynda opened Kidz Kabin in September 2011, following 15 years in the childcare industry. Continually investing in state-of-the-art resources, Lynda and her team offer children a fantastic start in life. We discuss the nurseries, the sector more broadly, and the future of Kidz Kabin now. Lynda, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming on today. I know it's still term time, so it's always busy. And it's been a few months, in fact, since Kidz Kabin has been in the review, Lynda. I thought it might be a nice place to start with, and the listeners would love to know, I think, how you and the team are doing at Kidz Kabin.
Well, we're all doing very well. It's a very busy time of year. The children have lots of theatre trips at the moment. So we take the children on our minibus to a local arts centre, the Arts Depot.
Excellent.
And we take 10 or 12 of them at a time. So there's weekly trips to see a Christmas show at the moment. We've been very busy since writing for the Parliamentary Review. We've been very busy developing our forest school initiative, and we've now actually introduced it into primary schools, where we go into primary schools and we offer workshops for them, and that's going really well.
Superb, and I think we'll certainly touch on that in a little bit more detail later, because it is exciting, and I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are thinking, wouldn't even begin to know where to begin taking a minibus of children to the theatre without panicking. So I can imagine it is exceptionally busy with all of that. Now, I know that you have a strong ethos at Kidz Kabin, of course, not to what you'd call spoon feeding the children. Now, what approach do you employ at the nurseries, Lynda, that you found that is most successful in making sure the children are engaged with their world?
Well, I think it's very important to recognise that every child has different strengths, but that every child does have strengths. And what we like to do is bring out those strengths and those special skills that the children are developing. And we like to recognise that these individual children are able to have a voice, that we listen to them, we listen to what they say, we engage with their own curiosity, and we scaffold their activities. So if they talk to us about something, so for example, today a little boy was telling us that he used to live on a farm and also near some mountains, and he was looking at some farm animals, and he said, "Oh, that's not just an ordinary goat, that's a mountain goat." And he then proceeded to sort of build a little mountain for the goat. And then that got us on to talking about mountains and rivers and what they need. So, you know, even though we might be doing one activity, we hear what the child says. We like to work with them. It gives them confidence, and it makes them feel important, which of course they are.
And without a doubt, and I think for a lot of people, Lynda, especially those that might not work with children. I think it can be easy to forget that they're, not just children, as it were, but each one of them has their own emotions, just like us. They have bad days, they have good days. And as you've said, it's so important to be able to engage with them on an individual level.
Yeah, so obviously if a child is upset, it's not our ethos just to leave them to be upset. We try and find out why. And, sometimes children do need to be left alone to have a little bit of time, but we're watching them. We're nearby. We don't let it sort of go on. We'll try and distract them. Distraction's always a great way of getting children to forget about something they're not happy about. We have a very diverse range of children coming from all different backgrounds, and we welcome every single one of them. And it doesn't matter to us whether the child comes for 3 hours a day or 10 hours a day. They all are treated and given the same amount of respect, and respect is very important. We work closely with the children, we work closely with the parents. We want to understand, what it is that the child needs and how to take them further.
Excellent. And since you've already brought it up, Lynda, we might as well talk about it. Now, I know obviously being set in an urban environment brings its own unique challenges, but you have, of course, introduced forest school learning. It's going tremendously well, and I think some people might be quite unfamiliar with the concept of it and how it works. Would you mind outlining it for us, Lynda?
Yeah, so children are encouraged to find their voices in the outdoor environment, where they can engage with the natural world, really, where there's no walls, there's no sort of barriers. When we are outside, we do actually create a boundary because we need to keep the children safe. And we explain to the children that this is like your outdoor classroom. So we don't want you to wander outside. But we make it with logs. And we're basically teaching them about nature, how to use nature, how to engage with nature, to have a sustainable environment, about animals, looking after the environment. So, for example, one of the things we sometimes do is we go for a walk in the woods and we look for things that shouldn't be there. And the children will collect them. It might be sweet wrappers, it might be a broken pencil. And when they'll collect these different things, and then we'll talk about them. We'll say, what do you think has happened? What were people doing? What's happened in the woods? What can we tell from what we found? So we get them to think about outside of just being in the woods. So somebody found a piece of, a torn piece of newspaper, and they said, oh, somebody was redoing a magazine. So they think about what's been going on, and also what things you can leave in the woods and what things you can't leave in the woods. So, for example, over the October Halloween period, we found some discarded pumpkins, but we explained to the children, although we don't normally find those in woods, it's absolutely fine. And they understood. We talked about how pumpkins grow, where they come from, but the children actually tell us. We just ask the questions and the children fill us in with the answers from what they know, what they understand. And then they work out that actually this is a natural, this is a natural food, even though it's been just discarded. Birds can feed on it, mini bees can feed on it. It's great to leave in the woods, and eventually it will just sort of become mulch, and it'll go back into the land. Whereas obviously something like plastic, you obviously have to remove because it will never break down.
What a tremendous thought exercise that is for them, and I mean, not only, of course, is that them immediately engaging in their own critical thinking, but of course, if to add on the environmentalism as well is a marvellous thing. And you said, sorry, Lynda, that this had been extended to local primary schools at the beginning.
Yeah, so a local primary school contacted me. They were learning about the Stone Age, and they asked me if I could provide 2 sessions, one for each parallel class. And take them into the woods and talk about things that might have happened in the Stone Age, which is exactly what we did. So we we got them making jewellery from elder branches. And of course, the elder tree is a very, very ancient tree. We were actually working in an ancient wood. We looked at how they could have created pictures using mud and sticks, and they were just mixing mud with water. They were using pieces of natural fabric, which in this case was cotton, and they found lots of leaves and petals, and then using stones, they tapped the petals and the leaves to produce pictures onto the cotton. So there was lots of learning going on. And then, of course, the other thing we did, we made clay pots, which is something they might have used in the Stone Age, and we showed them how to create a simple pot. And they were able to take away with them things that they'd actually made. They were able to take away necklaces made of elder. They were able to take away pictures made of mud. They were able to take away cotton fabric, which they had natural petals and green leaf prints on. So it was fantastic for them. I had very good feedback.
Excellent. Well, it's a great way to engage the children, and a fairly unique one. And speaking of engagement, broader engagement with the local community, I know you had been developing relationships, Lynda, with local care homes. Now, naturally, this benefits not just the children, but the elderly residents as well. Now, aside from ensuring that the nurseries have good roots with the local community, how do you see the children responding and learning when they're put with a much older generation?
Well, it's interesting. Some of them are quite shy at first, but actually they are supported by our staff, and I think they certainly the elderly residents find it very charming when they see the children, because specific activities are always set up. They might be doing some cooking, or they might be doing some painting, and the children, I think they probably look at them maybe like if they've got grandparents, they recognise that they're older, and they chat to them. And as soon as once they get to know them, the children are very open. They chat away, they sing to them, and I don't think that they really forget about the age gap. You know, I think once the residents start to engage with the children, they're just painting or they're cooking. The children get engaged, and it's lovely because the age gap really closes. You know, nobody's thinking about, or the children aren't thinking about, oh, they're very old. They're just thinking about what we're doing together. And it's very sweet, and it's very, very good for the residents in the care homes, because it gives them something to look forward to. It stimulates their minds. It gives them things to talk about. So it's great for them, because sometimes they're very lonely and they're very bored, and this gives them something each week to look forward to. What
a wonderful way to the bridge gap and to that generational gap, and of course keeping the nurseries involved locally. And perhaps just stepping away and looking more broadly here, Lynda, as things stand at the moment, what would you say, what would you identify as the major challenges affecting not just Kidz Kabin, but the sector more broadly?
Well, I'm sure everybody has heard about the government funding, and they promote it as a free offer to parents.
Quite.
And what I don't think everybody realises is that the local authorities do not pay what the fees actually are. So they will just give you a fixed figure, an hourly figure. So let's say, for example, our figure was £7.50 an hour. They might pay £4.99 an hour. And they expect us not to top up from the parents. Now, the problem is, in early years, we have very high ratios of staff to children. So for under 2, you have to have 1 member of staff, 3 children. For 2 to 3, it's 1 to 4, and so on. And you know, we want to pay our staff really well, and we certainly do pay them much more than the basic living, the basic wage. But unfortunately, no matter how much we do pay. We can't charge the parents very much more than what the government pays. So we do charge them for meals, we do charge them for outings, and we do have some extra things that we can charge them for. But of course, parents are under the illusion that it's free. And what they don't seem to realise is actually all the nurseries and all the early year settings that are actually subsidising it.
Yes.
So it's not really free.
It's a huge challenge, because, we're in the midst, we're speaking, Lynda, in the midst of a general election, which is sort of ruined everybody's Christmas.
Well, I've heard about some of the ideas that they're putting forward, and I am totally opposed to them.
Yes.
So I know that they're thinking about extending the amount of hours offered to 2-year-olds from 15 to 30. I think I even heard that one of the parties was thinking of offering it to children of 9 months. They have absolutely no idea. And if that happened, I don't think anybody would actually offer it, because we couldn't possibly do it. But they don't seem to understand the impact of offering something that they are not delivering, that private settings are happy to deliver, and they're not consulting with us and saying, is this something you can do? So, we're just hearing about it on the news, like everybody else.
And one gets there, and you'll know as well as anyone, Lynda, just this year there have been so many. In fact, we did closures of private nursery.
Many closures,
exactly. And this is certainly related to it. And you do get the feeling, all right, Lynda, is that when they're devising these policies in election time, it's more of a case of what do you think would sound best to the most people, rather than what's going to work in the most practical way possible. I'll put you on the spot, Lynda. Let's say you got to write that section of the manifesto instead. What would you like to see the major parties talk about in terms of ensuring the continued success of places like Kidz Kabin?
Well, I think, I'm not opposed to the government providing funding for childcare, but I think they have to understand that it's a subsidy, and that what they should be doing is offering as much as they want to offer to a parent. So it might be £5,000 a year, and saying to take this £5,000 for your childcare, or we'll pay it directly to your provider. And then whatever the difference is, you will need to pay it, because not all nurses charge the same. Not all nurses have the same high level of expectation. They don't all provide the same, high level resources. They don't all pay their staff the same. And there's so many differences between nurses, but none of these are taken into account or recognised when the government just takes a blanket figure and says, this is what we're paying, in this borough, for example. And there's big discrepancies between boroughs as well. So, for example, Camden will pay £8.10 an hour for 2-year-olds, and Haringey has recently cut it from £6 to £5.65 for 2-year-olds. They actually cut the funding. Can you believe that?
An extraordinary difference, and just one postcode away from...
exactly.
It makes things tremendously difficult. Maybe it's about time we need to start looking at a far more national plan for childcare, because as that point really does prove it, doesn't it, Lynda, that without any sort of communication between boroughs on the issue, it becomes exceptionally difficult for the likes of you to plan for the future.
And what we do, we offer our staff as high a wages as we're able to afford, and I think they are well above the average. But at the end of the day, there's only so high you can go, and people want to move on. They need to, they need to live, and they can't live on relatively low wages, indefinitely. Which is why it's hard to retain staff over a longer period.
That's actually a very interesting point, probably worth discussing, Lynda. How have you found, and in case the listeners don't know, of course, Kidz Kabin now has been going for almost a decade, really. How have you found staff retention, and has it changed over the last couple of years?
Well, it's interesting. We actually do have people that have worked here since we opened. So we've got people that have worked here 8 and 9 years.
Superb.
Which is fantastic. And they've now been promoted to managers and deputies. So we always promote from within, which always means that there's incentive and motivation. We do a lot of training. So actually, we're even extending. I know we were talking about forest school earlier. We're training our staff to use clay. We're having a clay day where they're learning all about kilns and making clay, so we can introduce that into the nursery as an extra activity. Something which is interesting. So we try and motivate our staff by providing interesting training. So that they're getting more skills themselves. And to be absolutely honest, we just review salaries and, we just do our very best. Sometimes we give them extra holidays. We do whatever we can to try and make them happy and keep them sort of wanting to work for us.
Excellent. Well, we've only had good things. And I'm conscious of the time here, Lynda, but perhaps if we can, we should look to the future. What are the plans for Kidz Kabin going forward?
Well, I think, we just continue to promote new ideas. We're very innovative. But so just one, we took on a brand new member of staff earlier this year who was brought in to work just amongst our 3 nurses to work with our preschool children who are about to move to reception to really promote and help them with school readiness so that each child is absolutely ready and confident to move to school. And that was an extra that we brought in over and above our normal staffing ratios. And so I think what we're going to do going forward, we're just going to continue to look at what new activities and what new opportunities there are for the children, develop the outdoors more and continue to promote forest school and activities around that, both within the nursery and outside the nursery, take it a little bit further into the wider community.
Fantastic. And I should ask, really, since it's December, any special plans for the children for Christmas?
Well, the children, we've taken them all to the theatre to see Christmas shows. Wonderful. And we have a Christmas party. And the staff, we have a staff Christmas party where we take them all out for a meal towards the end of the month.
Absolutely lovely. Well, no doubt it's an exceptionally busy time of year, Lynda, so I very much appreciate you joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we can speak again in the new year.
Thank you very much.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Lynda, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Kidz Kabin are continuing to raise standards. Note to any potential litterers in Muswell Hill and Wood Green, the local children will be judging you harshly. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that, no. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something, and it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without wrecking amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it has quite shocked them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, it's suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshirean, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians aren't interested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through. Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dialogue Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office, but who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara, which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who? I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunkett was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment you think in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state. And it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying that the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old males cycling to evensong and Warbane. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent uncaring about the probity of the Pope, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, you know, it's like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. And The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you were quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about
Yes.
it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
That's, but it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know this is going to be a huge focus of the next review. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Grosvenor to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.